My name is Dana Driskel, and I am a retired, I guess that makes me emeritus, professor from the University of California, Santa Barbara. I've produced a couple of things on the American Film Company, but the most enlarged one, of course, is the 60-minute long An American Film Company. What I chose to do there was to work with materials that were available at the time, and that was fairly limited. Most of it I can still stand by. The inaccuracies are not in it, but in terms of the way I would produce it today and the story that would be told today, it would be significantly different than the one that I made in 2003. The world has moved on. My insights have grown exponentially because of my traveling. When I made the film, I had been to the British Film Institute once. I had been to the Library of Congress maybe twice by that point, but I hadn't really done much traveling, and I hadn't seen enough films. But it would be years upon years before enough of the Flying A, American Film Company, Beauty brand, Clipper brand, all their sub-brands that they made, would be made available in the archives. Our archive in Santa Barbara, we have no moving image film per se. We might have a couple of copies or something like that. But the real films that can be viewed and understood and therefore made into something of value, you're going to find the largest collection will be at the Library of Congress. The second largest collection is going to be at the British Film Institute. But then there are any number of different scattering archives around the world that will have a film or two or maybe even 10 or 12 Flying A films. They probably have significantly more, but they're not going to be titled in English, and every print has its own dynamic life. It's not like today where things are pretty much copied on copied in. So when you see a film or you see a listing of a film in an archive, and they say, we have a print such and such, that's only step one. Then you have to look at it and you have to say, okay, what's missing? And sometimes it can be dramatically misinterpreted if the archivist or the researcher doesn't really know. The American Film Company produced over 1,000 films. Now, if those were 1,000 feature-length films, that would rival most studios ever. But many of them were shorts, and very few of them survived, maybe 10%. But that's pretty common. And the Flying A films were distributed worldwide. They were international. But the problem is that they can be in the archive, yet undiscovered in terms of people knowing what they really have. And I'm hoping that as we have more societies looking at it, starting to recognize the actors and recognizing the scenarios, etc., that they will eventually discover that it could well be that there's another 20% of them out there that are just mislabeled. It's getting significantly easier now to come up with a more accurate picture because of the wonderful amount of digital newspapers and digital trade papers that have been put online. The website, we started that, I think it was around 2005. George Michaels, who was the head of instructional development at the university, he was my tech guru, and he would handle all things data side, and I would handle digging this stuff up and researching it and loading it in. The website took years upon years to be of significance, but we didn't originally see it as having a reason to be significant. My goal with that in the early days of that technology and such was I needed something when I went to research institutions. I could have taken bundles upon bundles of loose-leaf notebooks and such, but instead, by having the material in the database, I could just check that. Now, that's child's play today, and everybody just says, well, of course, how could you do it any other way? But at that time, that was the way you did it. So I was using the website as a way that I could check my material back at Santa Barbara when I'm working somewhere else on the globe. Then we started saying, well, do we want to make this more public friendly? And the goal for that was to have people notice it so that they would send information in. And that really worked well. I found a couple of other surprising places where material worked. And this is fairly common for researching. There was one of the actresses, Margarita Fisher, who's highlighted in the documentary. Her niece, who actually also worked at the Flying A, retired and went to Kansas, lived out her years. And then her mother's materials, Margarita Fisher's materials, were donated to Wichita State. Now, if I were looking for silent film actresses and I wanted to know about her, I would not start at Wichita State. But God bless the people of Wichita State, they put their stuff up online. I've been very fortunate in having people at the archives, and ones you wouldn't think of, that have been able to help us out. Now we've moved the website to the Gled Hill Library, Santa Barbara Historical Museum, and that is, I think, going to be a second renaissance. We're going to be able to add more to it than I was able to do as one person. I try to get more and more people involved and keep working on bringing in new materials, because the best I could do in 2015, I could do substantially more 10 years later today. And that means that there's still a lot of material out there that we will discover over time. When I say we, I mean researchers who are going to go into the archives and look at them in a fresh way. I think some of the older researchers, we did our job, we did it with the tools we had. I have to wear glasses when I read up close because I spent so many years staring at the hideous thing known as microfilm. If you ever have an opportunity to look at microfilm or need to for research, don't do it. It's a horrible way to do work, and it's so much better now. There is a downside, though, with the modern technology, and I'm rather concerned about it, that I'm not necessarily sure we aren't within a few years of when AI will simply rewrite the history of motion picture in a very, very convenient way.